It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. Today, I want to spend some time on an issue that it's just been on my mind a lot lately. You know how the universe sort of brings you things? I've just noticed lately kind of a cluster of experiences, relationships, articles that have come my way. Like, something is telling me I really need to explore this. Well, the issue is education. Education. And the fact that some of y'all need some book learning. And it shows. In defense of education, that's what this is today. In defense of education and the kind of folks I'm running into in my real life, in my online life. And for the purposes of our conversation today, I've divided them into three archetypes. One is the anti-intellectual. That's something, of course, I think we're all familiar with, anti-intellectualism. It's been around for a long time. It's very American. The pseudo-intellectual, which some might accuse me of being. That's the trap I have to avoid. I got to be really careful not to fall into the pseudo-intellectual trap. I try to do that by being humble, because one of the defining characteristics of the pseudo-intellectual is their confidence. Oh my, they're confident. I'm not. I'm filled with self-doubt. So I think that gives me a pass. I'm not a pseudo-intellectual because I'm riddled with self-doubt. So there's the anti-intellectual, there's the pseudo-intellectual, and then there's what I call, for lack of a better term, the money man. And yeah, it is mostly men. So I want to talk about education today. Now let me give one little proviso first. I want to make it clear that if you have little or no formal education, I'm not necessarily lumping you into any of these categories. There are plenty of folks with no higher education who are doing just fine, able to reason, able to look at the world realistically, function properly, be a thoughtful, intelligent person in this world. Plenty, plenty, plenty. Most people have one or two sort of specialties. They have something they're relatively expert in, they're passionate about. And so they know a little bit about it, or maybe a lot about it. And it's fun to talk with people like this. So I want to make sure that's clear at the outset. I'm not painting with a broad brush, saying everybody without a master's degree just needs to shut up and listen to us experts. No. Not at all. Not at all. But this is a warning of some very dangerous tendencies that you don't want to fall into. And if you have, maybe do a little self-examination. So again, the three archetypes: anti-intellectual, pseudo-intellectual, and what I'm calling the money man. All right, let's go anti-intellectual first. I think a lot of us are very familiar with this. I don't need no book learning. I got street smarts. People who put in their profile under the education category, they'll put School of Hard Knocks. They take a lot of pride in that. And I'm not sure why it happens, but the anti-intellectual, I don't know, is it a defense mechanism? That because this guy doesn't have a lot of book learning, he has to embrace that as a strength? Maybe so. I don't know. I will say this, in my experience with the anti-intellectual, and trust me, I know plenty of them, almost my entire upbringing, my entire circle growing up, all the friends, all the family, a great emphasis on so-called common sense and a sort of Midwestern humility. Oh, we don't need all that fancy learning. I know what I know. I don't know art, but I know what I like. You know, that sort of thing. That just dominated my entire life until I jumped in my van and moved away. Now, these folks, I'm generalizing here, usually, in my experience, very nice people, generous. Now, as we see, they can also be really vicious, like Michigan militia types. They're definitely anti-intellectual types. So, I don't know. I don't think there's a correlation necessarily. An anti-intellectual isn't necessarily, by definition, a nice and generous person or a mean, vicious person. I don't think there's a correlation. Among this strain of folks, there are people like Ben Carson. All right? A brain surgeon. You have to be pretty smart to be a brain surgeon. So why is he so incredibly, undeniably, pathologically, demonstrably dumb? It'd take people a lot smarter than me to explain that. There's a good article I'll point you to, and then I'll remind you at the end of the program. It's called, let's see, I came across this. One of the things that came across my vision recently that prompted me to think about these issues. I'm looking for it here. Oh, here it is. Are Americans just stupid? Article in Psychology Today. Anti-intellectualism has little to do with intelligence, is the subtitle of this article. And it also has some pretty good links within the article, too. So I'll remind you about that at the end of the program. But as the subtitle there implies, not necessarily a sign of intelligence to be an anti-intellectual. There are other forces at work. There are cultural forces, religion, the way you were raised. So, yeah, you can have somebody like Ben Carson. I mean, just an idiot in so many ways. Completely out of his league when he got into politics, but found all this success because stupid likes stupid. As was often said about the Orange Menace, a dumb person's idea of a smart person, a poor person's idea of a rich person, you know? I think Rand Paul maybe falls into that category as well. He's very confident in his libertarianism. Answers come so easily. Everything is just so simple for these folks. This comes back to education. It appears as though guys like this either weren't paying attention or never had any education in critical thinking, in basic logic. They went to school. In the case of Ben Carson, became a brain surgeon. But I don't know if he ever had a class in humanities, in philosophy, in history, in really actually understanding the world and the people in it. Rand Paul, also a doctor. What is he, a foot doctor? An eye doctor? Something like that. Yeah, I think he's an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist, something like that. So he has degrees to hang on the wall, but I see no indication that he's ever been taught basic human decency that you learn in the humanities, history, anthropology, philosophy. These things are valuable. And I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and let the benefits of education just be pilloried the way they've been recently. I said earlier how anti-intellectualism doesn't necessarily correlate with being good or nice or bad or rude. It doesn't seem to be. I know in my family, mostly just really kind of nice, fine people. But there's also the other strain. There's as mentioned, the Michigan militia types. We've discovered recently, there's been lots of research on this, how racism and white supremacy and far-right militancy are rampant among police officers, in law enforcement, and in the military. A recent study from the Brennan Center talks about this revolving door between police forces across the country in every city and the KKK and militia groups and this terrible white supremacist philosophy that finds its way into tangible, documented activities in online communities, in actual flesh and blood, face-to-face organizations, meetings, neo-Nazi groups training out in the woods, the resurgence of the KKK, and coming right out of the woodwork, like in Charlottesville. Not the only case in recent American history of open demonstrations. And as this research is pointing out, serious infiltration of both the U.S. military and city police forces across the country. These are not educated folks. These are the very dark side of the anti-intellectual movement. I can't imagine a well-educated kid who's been appropriately well-trained in critical thinking and in the humanities falling into this kind of life. I can't imagine it. They had to have fallen through those cracks. They escaped whatever schooling they had without being properly exposed to the basic decency and humanity that really is inescapable. The decency and the humanity that a really good education will provide. So there's the anti-intellectual. And again, lots of firsthand experience. Friends, family members. And then haven't really talked about this yet, but then dangerously susceptible to media personalities with easy answers. And now you get your Fox News and your AM talk radio and your Rush Limbaughs. The epitome of anti-intellectualism. Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, all of them college dropouts, all of them know-it-alls. And for some folks, very easy to fall victim. All right, so next on my list here is the pseudo-intellectual. Now, this is a very interesting group here. Talked about how anti-intellectuals can go either way. They can be very nice, generous people, or they can be vicious killers. There seems to be no correlation. With the pseudo-intellectual, again, just my experience, what I read, what I find in my, and I'm thinking of a couple of very specific people right now. I'm not going to name any names. I'm not going to attack. I'm not going to make this a personal attack. But I've got a few people in my life I'm thinking about right now. And their emphasis on intellect supersedes any basic human decency. They really are, the guys I'm thinking about right now, are contemptible people. In the pandemic, they really seriously could just care less about the 250,000 people dead. Doesn't even enter their mind any thought of empathy for 1 second because they're just able to intellectualize everything. The guys I'm thinking about and the people I read that fit this category, almost always contrarian. They take such great delight in having and espousing views that are contrary to common wisdom. Now, I take some delight in that too. And I'll often do it. So, as I said earlier, I have to be careful. I'm always on guard. I'm watching myself. I don't want to fall into this trap. But they're always contrarian. They love the outliers. They love to be outliers. They love to promote outliers. The so-called dark web, if you've heard that term. Yeah, it's just troublemakers. Mavericks. People going rogue. It's central to their identity, it seems. To the point where it's almost all that's necessary. Well, everybody disagrees with you? You must be right. Everybody disagrees with me? Oh, I'm onto something. They just take that as this badge of honor. And so then now you got your anti-maskers and you got your climate change deniers and you got all that whole thing. People who rail about political correctness, and it's just all so damn predictable at this point. I got this one friend. I've got conservative friends in my social feed that I really appreciate because without them, I would never see this side of the world. I don't have a lot of them. In recent months, I've purged a lot of my conservative friends because I just can't take it anymore. But there are a few who really do open that window for me in an interesting way. And I keep them around because, A, I have a personal relation. I've talked about this before on the show. The ones I've kept, I have a personal relationship. One of the guys I'm talking about right now, I love like a brother. He's an interesting, fascinating, smart guy. He's artistic and creative and imaginative, and I love the guy. I love spending time with him. I love talking with him. But he's a nutcase. And he's a pseudo-intellectual. Oh, my God. So, yeah, I've kept some of these friends because they provide information to me that I wouldn't otherwise get. So, this guy I'm thinking about right now, my pseudo-intellectual friend. Oh, he's got the greatest Facebook page you're ever going to see in your life. And every week he's got a new guru that he's promoting. For a while it was James Howard Kunstler. You know this guy? Oh, he's just a prototypical crackpot. One trait that they all share in common is that they're almost all self-educated. They're almost all college dropouts. And as I said earlier, they're outliers. They're mavericks. And Kunstler's another one of these guys. College dropout, writer, social critic, blogger, just a self-proclaimed know-it-all. Had some success, sold some books. I'm sure he's got YouTube videos. That's something else almost all these guys have in common. They're all masters of YouTube. Let's see. Another example of that is Brett Weinstein. Now, here's a guy who's educated. So these guys, they either A, have no formal education. They're self-taught. They just jump around. They're a completely self-guided tour of the intellectual world. And they proclaim themselves experts at whatever they choose to talk about. Or they are educated, and this gets back to maybe the Rand Paul type. Brett Weinstein, for example, is a biologist, a very accomplished biologist. And he's a kind of a lefty libertarian, and he's a dark web star, and he talks about politics and everything under the sun as though he's some expert. So it's either a college dropout or it's some highly trained Ben Carson type who is completely out of their lane. So that's a common trait. The trained theologian who's talking about science, or the trained scientist who's talking about theology. They're always outside their lane. My pseudo-intellectual friend loves some guy who claims that pandemics come from outer space. Of course, his favorite of all is Jordan Peterson, king of the pseudo-intellectuals, trained in one area and self-proclaimed expert in all areas. They are specialists in their own bias. That's all they are. Okay, so now we've talked about the anti-intellectual, the pseudo-intellectual, and all of this for me today is in defense of a good, well-rounded education, which a lot of us really seem to be lacking right now. Are Americans just stupid? What's going on? All right, my third category is what I call the money man. Now, this is I'm thinking again of a very specific friend of mine, a social media friend. I've talked about him before. He's a Trumpster. He's an anti-masker. He's everything you'd expect. He checks off every box. Let me say, for each category, I've been relating this archetype to whether or not they are good or bad people. The anti-intellectual can go either way. A very nice, generous person or a son of a bitch. The pseudo-intellectual, I've found, in my experience, are horrible people who really just don't get human decency. They don't understand it. Now, the money man, I've found to be sweethearts. For the most part, there can be some exceptions, but for the most part, they love their family, they love their work, and everybody at work is like family, and they're just sort of steeped in sentimentality about the love they have for their wife and children, and the love they have, oh, we're like a family at work, and oh, I love my customers, and they really just are steeped in that attitude. There's a lot of that in the money man, and especially in this one guy I'm thinking of. Very quick to give to charity. They love charity. Of course, they hate socialism. They hate any kind of distribution of public wealth. They hate taxation. They hate that. Oh my God, no. Don't give those lazy people my tax money. But then as a counter to that, they're very big on private charity. So this is a weird group, the money man. But there's a lot of them out there. I see them everywhere. The business owner, the entrepreneur. Now, here's something I've noticed. My particular guy, my money man, Just recently, he became certified as a deep-sea diver. And he posted a picture of himself in his full gear with his flippers and air tank and the whole thing. He's an adventurer. He partakes in conspicuous adventurism. Baseball fantasy camps. He'll post pictures of himself in a Dodgers uniform, out with, playing with the pros. He goes to baseball fantasy camps. He's got money, so he can do these kinds of things. He can jump out of airplanes, which I'm pretty sure he's done as well. If memory serves correctly, I think he's done that too. So he puts himself forward. He's got this self-image as somebody who's really living life. And he's got so many friends, and he does. But he's dumb as a post. Just dumb as a post when it comes to, because he's also, of course, very, very vocal, very loud about his political views. And again, it's all freedom, spelled D-U-M-B. Anti-mask, climate denying, immigrant bashing. He checks every box. And he shows no sign, none, of any actual critical thinking, any logical skills. He latches on to right-wing talking points, conspiracy theories, and yet he's this very successful business owner, financial advisor, entrepreneur, conspicuous adventurer, living the big life. This is the money man. One of the gurus of the money man cult, I think, would be Scott Adams. You familiar with Scott Adams? He's the cartoonist famous for Dilbert, which is actually a very funny cartoon. I've enjoyed Dilbert over the years. But he graduated into a self-proclaimed expert on literally everything, on politics, on religion. His education is in business. He has an MBA. So it's all about business and money and all that. But now he's become this hero to so many, and he's the money man. There's no world really outside of making money and spending money. Everything is seen through that lens. But then just decides on his own that he's an expert on anything he cares to talk about. A couple of little posts, memes that circulate widely, kind of fit in with the money man attitude. Here's one that I just saw the other day. I'm reading now. It's 2020. Get rid of Algebra 2 in high school and replace it with financial fundamentals. Teach kids about careers, not just college, salaries, credit, budgeting, taking out a loan, investing, college debt, buying a house, filing taxes. You may have seen this or similar posts out there. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but here's my problem with it. People who post this kind of thing have the idea that this is life, that these are the most important things in life. Investing, buying a house, dealing with your credit cards and your taxes and your budgeting and your career and your salaries. Well, of course they're important things. But I'm trying to make the case today that education in school and continuing education throughout your life needs to be just as focused, more focused, in my opinion, centrally focused in the humanities, in history, in philosophy, geography, anthropology, critical thinking, media literacy, basic logic, along with the humanities, the natural sciences, environmental science. We got to turn this thing around, and we got to learn how to live in this world with each other. We have to learn how to live on this planet. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if we did teach kids about careers and jobs and salaries and credit and budgeting and loans and investing and college debt and buying a house and filing taxes, if that was all taught properly, every kid would come out a raging socialist, a communist even. If those topics were taught with any real honesty, the selfishness, the exploitation inherent, in all of these areas, the central role of money and capitalism and classism embedded, entrenched in these topics, Yeah, if they were taught properly, every kid would come out a raging communist. So yeah, teach them. Teach them right. There's another similar post going around. You do not have to go to college to make a good living. And it lists all these professions and their salaries. A plumber makes up to $45 an hour. A crane operator, wind turbines, commercial driver, up to $37 an hour. A carpenter, up to $52 an hour. Auto body repair, up to $35 an hour. Auto mechanic, heavy equipment mechanic, HVAC tech, $40 an hour. Enroll in a trade school. Now, that's fine. We need these things. Okay. But it's got just serious tones of anti-intellectualism here. You can be the greatest plumber in the world and make a very nice living, but then when you're through showing your plumber's crack, then at night you go to your KKK meeting. We've got to learn to be decent people. We've got to learn to care for each other and for the planet. We need education. We need decent education at every level from pre-K on up. Basic values, lessons in logic and communications. We're not getting what we need. And people who want to constantly dismiss the value of this kind of education, and especially of higher education, of college, and it has become expensive, but that's not a reason to not go. That's a reason to fight the system, to make college available, to make college free. Posts like this also give the idea, and so many people have fallen into this ridiculous idea, that the only reason to go to school is to be trained in a profession. No, not at all. It might be a nice thing along the way, but the argument I'm trying to make today is the education that we need is to turn us into decent human beings, functioning, reasoning, empathetic. Trade school might be a fine thing, but it's not going to give you that. Yeah, we got to read some Shakespeare. Yeah, we got to read some Vonnegut. We got to read some Emily Dickinson and Toni Morrison and Ta-Nehisi Coates and James Baldwin and Maya Angelou, the contemporary writers, the classic writers. And I haven't even mentioned civics. I learned civics in school. Apparently, it's no longer a point of emphasis to come out of high school with a really good understanding of how the government works. Apparently, that's not a priority anymore. So I'm defending education today. I am rejecting anti-intellectualism. I am rejecting pseudo-intellectualism. And I am rejecting the money man. So once again, I'll share that article with you. Are Americans just stupid? From Psychology Today. It's just a short article. Psychology Today never gets too deep. But I'll include it on the Facebook page because it does have some links to other articles that if you want to explore this a little bit. Anyway, education. Get yourself educated. I love you. That's the log for today. I'm Charles Purcell.